In the world of professional wrestling, there will be forever talented individuals that for whatever reason don't reach their full potential or destiny. And that couldn't be more true for one Mad Maxine, the former protege to women's wrestling legend, the Fabulous Moolah, in the early 1980s. With her incredible height and menacing look, Maxine was destined for greatness, especially under the tutelage of a WWE Hall of Famer. But of course, her trainer Moolah wasn't exactly the nicest person to be around, often being extremely harsh to her students when training them, pushing them beyond their limits. As Moolah had practically full control of women's wrestling at the time, she controlled the market and dictated booking decisions, effectively choosing who did and didn't succeed at the peak of women's pro wrestling in the United States. Mad Maxine's ceiling was very high, but unfortunately, due to the cruelty suffered at the hands of Moolah's training, alleged abuse, and even being aware of Moolah's pimping operation, Maxine decided to leave her training school even after getting a WWF contract. The bright lights and fame weren't enough for Maxine to endure the treatment from Moolah, as this is the story of one of the biggest missed opportunities in pro wrestling history, Mad Maxine. Real name Janine Mozeth, Mad Maxine was billed as a 6'4" towering woman, although in reality stood around 6'2". And when she was introduced to the world of pro wrestling in the early 80s, she knew she could excel. Mozeth was of Norwegian descent and grew up as an army brat, attending high school in West Germany. She received a scholarship to play basketball at the University of Kentucky in the States, and played with the Kentucky Wildcats for 2 years before choosing to take a sabbatical from her college studies. She eventually returned to college and was once again offered an athletic scholarship, this time with the University of South Florida. But she declined the offer to play sports at USF and instead chose to concentrate on journalism, one of her true passions, and something she does to this day. Mozeth was first introduced to professional wrestling after meeting a friend's boyfriend who worked as a wrestler. His mother, Beverly Shade, also worked as a wrestler and agreed to talk with Mozeth. A few years after graduating college, she pursued the dream of becoming a professional wrestler, moving to Columbia, South Carolina to train with the Fabulous Moolah at her wrestling school. Whilst a trainee at Moolah's school, Mozeth cut her hair into a mohawk and developed the Mad Maxine persona. The look, which also included leather lace-up wrestling gear that she sewed herself, was modelled on the characters in Mad Max films and the X-Men comic book character Storm. By the late 80s and early 90s, Moolah still largely controlled much of the pipeline into mainstream women's wrestling in the United States. Training under the Fabulous Moolah meant access to major promotions like Vince McMahon's WWF, but it also meant being shaped to fit a very specific vision: marketable, tough, and sadly often secondary to their male counterparts' storylines. By early 1985, Mad Maxine had begun working with the WWF, having 2 televised matches against Susan Starr for WWF American Wrestling, airing on March 31st, and again against Desiree Peterson for the WWF Championship Wrestling on April 16th, winning on both occasions. It was believed that pretty early on in her career, Moolah wasn't a fan of Maxine's look or character. But regardless, the fans seemed to very much disagree, and were intrigued by what she could do in the ring, mainly due to her stature and grimacing persona. Wrestling in the late 80s was all about being larger than life, and having a larger than life character, and Mad Maxine couldn't have fit that mold any better. Hence why it came as no surprise that Maxine was set for a big push in the WWF, going into a feud with then women's champion Wendy Richter. But to everyone's surprise at the time, Mad Maxine did the unthinkable, leaving the company entirely, mainly due to the treatment she received from her mentor, Fabulous Moolah. Unfortunately, it seems that even her own protege wasn't safe from Moolah's antics, as Moolah played a crucial role in Maxine ultimately departing from the company, after a character using Maxine's likeness and name was created for the Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling cartoon. Maxine revealed that Moolah hadn't even informed her the company's intention to use her for the show. And to make matters worse, it was also revealed that the not-so-fabulous one had been taking way too high of a cut for Maxine's wages, which left her no choice but to exit the company. Oh, and not to mention the fact that it was Moolah herself who replaced Maxine in the rock and wrestling cartoon. Maxine went into radio silence mode after leaving the company, rarely commenting on her departure until the release of her book, The Chronicles of Mad Maxine, in June of 2020, as well as a few interviews here and there throughout recent years. Maxine was quoted as saying, quote, "She was just a bad person. Moolah didn't have a good bone in her body," end quote. Adding to speculation that it was indeed Moolah who forced her out of the company, effectively due to the terrible treatment she suffered at the hands of Moolah, alongside dozens if not hundreds of other women at the time. At the time of the incident, Maxine harbored a lot of more than understandable resentment towards Moolah, saying, quote, "She was an evil person, and I understand why. She came from nothing. Her mother died when she was just 8, and she was never going to be poor again," end quote. Sympathizing with her upbringing, while still condemning the actions she had at the Fabulous Moolah training camp towards her students. And speaking of those actions, some of them included actually pimping out the women she was training, as Maxine was quoted in an interview with BBG saying, "Moolah did send girls out to this guy in Arizona and pimped them out. I actually spoke to him on the phone and asked him what he was looking for. He said, 'If I'm spending all this money, you know what I want.' That was part of Moolah's way of making money. She was just a bad person," end quote. Maxine did go on further in the interview to say that she no longer harbored such resentments towards Moolah, especially after her passing, saying, quote, "I don't have any animosity towards Moolah or anybody. It was a part of my life, probably the most colourful part, so I don't have any regrets. I don't feel like, oh, I wish I'd stayed another 5 or 10 years, end quote. Growing up as a so-called army brat, Janine was never in one place for too long and didn't grow up watching wrestling. The decision to train at the Camp Moolah had an underlying purpose, and it was never to make a career out of wrestling. Quote, "I got a journalism degree from the University of South Florida, then I worked in a retirement community newspaper where I interviewed the people there, who were super accomplished, and I thought, I haven't done anything, I need to go out there and figure something out," end quote. Maxine's real passion was journalism and photography, which is still her occupation and passion to this day. She will of course be forever a what could have been story in the world of pro wrestling, but as she said herself, quote, "I wrestled for a total of 2 years, so I was pleased that I had not been forgotten." Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell for post notifications, as well as sharing this video. Every little helps, and I'm so grateful. That's all for me. Until next time, Empire out.